Back in 1997, a paper landed in the journal Nature that would completely flip our understanding of forests on its head. It was from a scientist named Suzanne Simard, and it proposed a radical idea that trees might not be these silent, lonely giants, but instead part of a huge, hidden social network. And it all started by questioning an idea we thought we knew for sure.
You know, for the longest time, the picture scientists painted of a forest was basically a battlefield. Every tree for itself, right? Just a constant, silent war for sunlight, for water, for any little bit of nutrients you could get from the soil. A pretty lonely existence.
But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if, under all the quiet competition on the surface, there was something else going on? A kind of hidden conversation. A biological superhighway connecting all of these individual trees into one massive functioning community.
So to even begin to answer that, we first have to get our heads around the physical connection that could make any of this possible. And it involves two very different trees and, well, a pretty mysterious underground partner.
Okay, so meet our main players. On one side, we have the paper birch, a tree that absolutely loves sunlight. On the other, the Douglas fir, which is an evergreen that can handle the shade. They seem like total opposites, but here's the thing. They often grow side by side in the same forests. And the relationship, as it turns out, is way more complex than just being competitors.
And the secret ingredient, the thing that links them all together, is this: mycorrhizal fungi. Now, we're not just talking about mushrooms here. We're talking about these vast, ancient networks of tiny little fungal threads that actually fuse with the roots of the trees. And get this, a single teaspoon of forest soil can contain miles of these threads, literally creating a physical link between all the trees.
Honestly, the best way to wrap your head around this is to think of it as nature's internet. It's this biological information superhighway, connecting the roots of maybe hundreds or even thousands of trees in a single forest. It creates what scientists now call the wood wide web.
Okay, so having a network is one thing. That's a huge discovery in itself. But proving that trees are actually using it to share vital resources, well, that's a whole other level of challenge. It required some seriously clever scientific detective work.
Here was the central puzzle. How on earth could you track something as invisible as carbon, which is basically a tree's food, moving from one tree to another, underground, through this massive fungal network? It sounds almost impossible, right?
Well, the experiment they designed was just beautiful in its simplicity. First, they planted the seedlings together. Step 2, they created a need. They put some of the fir trees in deep shade, which basically made them hungry because they couldn't photosynthesize enough food. Then the really brilliant part. They gave the trees air that contained special, traceable carbon isotopes. Think of it like a radioactive dye. And finally, they just waited to see where that dyed carbon ended up.
So, after running the experiment and crunching all the numbers, the researchers were about to uncover a secret that had been hiding there in the soil for millennia.
And that was the million-dollar question. Was there any transfer? Did this underground internet actually have any traffic on it, or was it just there?
The answer was a resounding yes. This graph, right from the original paper, shows a clear net transfer of carbon. That means the birch tree sent way more carbon to the fir tree than it got back. And look at those filled-in circles. Those represent the fir trees in the deepest shade. They received the biggest delivery by far. This wasn't just random leakage. It was targeted aid to those who needed it most.
And it wasn't a trivial amount either. On average, the Douglas fir seedlings got a net gain of 6% of the total carbon that both trees were producing. Now, 6% might not sound like a lot to us, but if you're a tiny seedling struggling for your life in the dark, a 6% food subsidy from your neighbor is an absolute game changer. It's a lifeline.
This confirmed what's called a source-sink relationship. The sunlit birch, the source, had plenty of carbon to spare, and the shaded fir, the sink, was in desperate need. The network acted like a pipeline, actively moving resources from the haves to the have-nots.
Now, this wasn't just some curious little finding about two types of trees. No way. This discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community, and it fundamentally challenged our whole view of how nature works.
And the authors knew it. I mean, in their own words, they basically called for the entire theory of how plant communities work to be rewritten. They argued that science had to start considering cooperation, mutualism, not just competition, as a main driver in the forest.
And ultimately, this research kicked off a massive paradigm shift. The big takeaway is that forests are not just collections of individuals locked in a fight to the death. They're deeply collaborative systems. This underground network shares resources, it supports the weaker trees, and that in turn helps the entire ecosystem become more diverse, more stable, and way more resilient.
And that leaves us with a final fascinating question. If a social network this complex, a network of sharing and cooperation, exists right under our feet in the forest, what other incredible secrets does the natural world still hold? What else are we simply not seeing?